Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series featuring yours truly, Tom Martin. And I'm a longtime journalist. I'm actually coming to you today from Washington, D.C., the city that gets things done, that's go, 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 and probably the intellectual capital. No, I'm just kidding. But I got my start in journalism here in Washington, D.C. at CBS News, and even worked with Walter Cronkite on election night here in D.C. And I appreciate the opportunity to join you from here. I love asking questions, and I love conversations with my dear friend, author David Parker, who is author of The San Francisco Conservative, his newest book, and Income and Wealth. Hey, David, how are you, sir?
I'm fine, thanks.
Great to see you.
Nice to see you traveling around the country.
It's nice to be back in Washington. It feels like my old hometown somehow. Been here, coming here since the early 80s, actually. I went to Ronald Reagan's inaugural here, as a matter of fact. Wow. So, and it's interesting because what I really want to talk about in this episode, I know that we don't want to give our audience information that might be dated, and we really don't. I mean, we talk about, the wisdom of Aristotle, for example. It'll never go out of date. But a couple of decisions came down recently from the Supreme Court that has me curious, to hear from you about one of the themes that you mention quite often in Income and Wealth and a San Francisco Conservative, and that is the role of government interference in our lives. And the two decisions that I'm thinking of that have a lot of my friends and family members kind of up in arms, so to speak, are not necessarily financial, but it's about, one had to do with our right to carry concealed weapons, and another had to do with overturning Roe versus Wade and a woman's right to choose, or abortion rights, overturning that decision, which had been upheld again and again and again over the past 50 years. And apparently in the decision, the justices, I think maybe it was Clarence Thomas writing the opinion on that decision, said, well, abortion is not mentioned in the Constitution, and for that reason, it really has no standing, and therefore we're overturning it, basically. What is the proper role of government in our lives?
This nation, let's go back. This nation was founded on the notion of freedom from government. It's only 1933 forward that we have freedom with government. You can't have both. Madison in Federalist 51 says, I don't know why we even are creating a government, because he could see no reason for government. He was pointed out that not all men are angels, and he bought that argument. So we need a neutral third party to protect life, liberty, and property, protect social freedom, social, political, and economic freedom, but not provide those things. Just a neutral third party to protect. Then, when the Constitution was written, someone says, I think we should write down a few rights that we have, called the Bill of Rights. Let's not leave this up to chance. And Hamilton was the strongest arguments against that. Once you start labeling rights, listing them, you're going to find yourself having to counter arguments, but, well, those are the only rights we have. When in fact, the Constitution was written to be so general that they were so conscious of the future, they didn't want the Constitution to be in the way of future legislation. It's a general document on one page long, written, and you can see it on display on an easel in Washington, D.C. One page. It's a big page because it's florid handwriting. Otherwise, it's on one page. You elect your Congress. Nobody else can make laws but Congress because nobody else is elected. That's John Locke's second treatise on civil government. All those basic ideas are in the Constitution. It's a general document. The Supreme Court, they're not doctors, they're not scientists. They shouldn't be judging whether an egg in 1 or 2 months is a life or not. And they shouldn't be judging, well, if you commit an abortion, are you committing murder? That's not for the Supreme Court to decide. In that sense, Clarence Thomas is correct. Don't throw this on the Supreme Court. It's nobody's business. If you want an abortion, you get an abortion. If you don't, you don't. If your community doesn't like that, they'll ostracize you and tell you to get out of our community. But this country is based on the notion of federalism, where power is dispersed throughout the nation. The Mormon says, okay, you don't like us, we're going to Utah. And if we want abortion, we'll have it. If we don't want abortion, we won't have it. That's how this country, that's what a Jeffersonian democracy is. People can think for themselves. It's not for the government to intervene in our lives in almost any way. That's the original thought.
Yeah. There was a good line. I think it was probably from a constitutional scholar they were interviewing. I think it was yesterday after, this decision regarding concealed weapons. And they said, or the quotation goes something like, as the Supreme Court, we're not final because we're infallible. We're infallible because we're final. The decision has been made. Where do we go from here? And so again, we hear our, Democratic leaders, Nancy Pelosi and President Biden speaking up. This will not stand, but it's going to have a big impact. And it just seems that I love what you said, that the Constitution is a beautifully written, a beautifully conceived document that is, I interpret what you said is open-ended, because how could they have known about, M16 assault rifles or in vitro fertilization or things like that?
Exactly. And as I said, Hamilton says, don't list anything. You're just going to strap yourself. The Constitution is meant for eternity. It's just a few sentences. If you want to outlaw guns, what do you just say? Okay, there's 330 million people in this nation. I think there's 330 million guns. Maybe we can take a couple guns out of circulation. That'll do it.
I'm with you on that. Yes. So that brings up some. I apologize for interrupting. In college here in Washington D.C., where I am today, I went to college at Georgetown University, and I thought, well, I'm going on to law school. I don't want to be a journalist, so I can major in whatever I want, and I majored in philosophy. So again, I studied, John Rawls and philosophy of justice and so on. And when you write about classical authors, not necessarily Aristotle, but Alexis de Tocqueville, for example, the quality of Americans were capable of certain judgment and passion and determination and creativity. And it just seems like with this kind of paternalism we're talking about, these Supreme Court decisions, that's kind of taking any choice out of our hands to really make our lives all that they can be. It just seems like that kind of paternalism runs counter to what America's all about, in my opinion.
America is a Jeffersonian democracy. Jefferson said Americans can and do think for themselves. And de Tocqueville says he couldn't believe how responsible Americans were for their lives. That he was in awe. Nowhere in Europe are people that responsible for their life. They look to the king, they look to the queen, to government, to the aristocracy to handle some of the major problems. Aristotle announced at the beginning of the Revolutionary War, we're going to create a nation that doesn't exist anywhere and has never existed anywhere on earth. No king or queen. And government is so small, you won't even see it. And everyone is on your own.
Well, they have some immense building after building after building. The EPA, the election commission here in Washington D.C. It's amazing. It's not so small that we don't see it. I have to be honest.
So the founding fathers looked at a very limited, constrained government, and from 1933, I guess, on, we have what's called an expanded. Progressivism is progress from the Constitution. We're moving forward. That's the word. We're going to have an expanded government.
Yeah. I just want to throw in for those of you joining us kind of midstream here, this is the podcast series, The San Francisco Conservative, named after David Parker, my colleague here, David's latest book, A San Francisco Conservative. And he's also the author of Income and Wealth, which is a brilliant book. I highly recommend both. And we're talking about what is the proper role of government in our lives, because that's certainly a timely topic now, suddenly more than ever. And again, we're talking about Alexis de Tocqueville and what he admired in the American spirit. And I don't know if this is going a little bit off tangent, but again, I've been here in Washington, D.C. for a couple of days. I was kind of sitting at a red light, maybe third car in line. A guy jumped off a little park bench and he started, squeegeeing, washing the window of the car in front of me. I'm thinking, oh no, I guess I should help. I care about people in poverty. Obviously, he wouldn't be doing this if he wasn't feeling the pinch or whatever. But it brings up that issue, that I know you and I have talked about, the difference between progressives and, the traditional federalist democracy ideal. Are we responsible for the homeless? I see a number of homeless people here in Washington, of course, and I'd like to think that people stop and help them. But progressives, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and so on, would say, no, we can't leave it at that. That's not enough. What are your thoughts on all that?
When you use the word "we," when I write, I'm very careful to eliminate pronouns. Who is we? This country was created to take the we out, to take the government out. Jefferson says individuals can take care of themselves. And if they can't, not everyone can. This nation historically has the greatest charities of the world. In fact, most of the great charities of the world originated in the United States. Every year, there's some huge statistic. Over 250,000 millionaires a year die in the United States. And if they didn't give during their lifetime, they usually will give when they die. Give this to the university, give this to the YMCA, give this to organizations that are helping people who are squeegeeing windows. There's plenty of this money. Country has plenty of money. And the proof that it's not good for the we, which is the government, to solve people's problems is the war on poverty. President Johnson says it was unconscionable that a nation this rich should have a 15% poverty rate. And we're fighting a war in Vietnam and we're running a budget deficit to do it. We're going to fight a second war simultaneously because it's just not right. And U.S. Census Bureau statistics show that the needle never moved. It's 15% today. It was 15% throughout the war on poverty. And we have a 23 trillion national debt related to the war on poverty, not including Social Security and Medicare, which are not self-sustaining anymore. We have a national debt and no change. And someday the nation has to stop and say, well, maybe we shouldn't be progressing from the Constitution. The Constitution was rule of law. Progressives think it as a rule of thumb. Big difference.
Yeah,
Big difference.
Yeah. And this might be shifting gears a little bit, but we're talking about progressives, so I'll get into this. And I think I asked you about this topic fairly recently. Again, I don't want to date this episode too much, but people are concerned about the price of gasoline. President Biden is pushing a proposal. Let's eliminate the federal gas tax, and that'll save about 18 cents out of every $6 gallon. And Elizabeth Warren, speaking of progressives, that's why I was thinking of progressives, was interviewed recently, and she said, this is so misguided because by lowering that cost, people will say, I guess I really can take that road trip after all. It's not effective. I mean, what do you make of, and again, some of our, political advisors, I think of, James Carville, who advised Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid, as you said. Do we feel it in our wallet? I know there's a war going on and, a million other things, coronavirus and what have you, but people are, feeling it in their wallet or pocketbook. What do you make of this whole, statements, we're going to save you the federal tax.
I opened up a whole subject here that's, we're talking economics and what inflation is and what price rise is, and they aren't necessarily the same. Inflation is when government starts printing money like on a mimeograph machine that devalues everything, and so the value everything goes up to compensate. But when demand is seriously more than supply, price will rise. And that's all there is to it. End of the question, no more discussion. You don't do a pathetic little save 2 cents. I'm surprised Elizabeth Warren gave a correct economic response. That's not her style. What you do that for? That's correct. There's always a consequence to every little interference in the economy. We know the gas is in short. Oil is in short supply with the Ukraine war for one, and the U.S. has cut back on their shale delivery. There you go. The price is gonna rise. That's all there is to it. If you want to lower the price, increase the supply.
Yeah.
There's nothing to talk about. Nothing to talk about.
Yeah. And I guess we have time for about one more question. And since we sort of deviated from purely financial discussion at the start of this conversation, I don't mind doing the same to close it out. Again, another topic that came up in this interview I heard recently with Senator Elizabeth Warren was about tariffs and supply chain issues, problems solving that, specifically having to do with China. And I know, for example, a lot of people, especially liberals, but perhaps broader than that, are up in arms that Joe Biden is going to be talking to the leaders of Saudi Arabia, the crown prince, who allegedly, cut up a journalist in little pieces as a journalist. That pains me, I have to say. And then Elizabeth Warren was saying, so Senator Warren, should we do away with the tariffs relating to China? And she said, well, yes and no. And I'm thinking a lot of products really need these computer chips, aviation and so on. And I think many of them are made in China. How do we balance things that it's like apples and oranges, human rights concerns and economic concerns?
Elizabeth Warren is correct again.
Amazing.
I have to vote for her. Who would have thought? Economic theory says don't do tariffs because they'll tariff you right back. The whole depression, the Great Depression, was Smoot-Hawley Act. More than anything else, we were going to employ Americans during the Depression, and we put a tariff against the rest of the world. And it says, okay, we'll tariff you right back. And the whole world came to a halt. So we might want to target a nation. That's actually Donald Trump almost had that right. He says, yeah, the theory is correct, but at a particular moment in time, if one country is tariffing us or acting really badly, almost like as a step of war, that's fine. We'll tariff China for a while. So maybe they'll get the point that they better stop doing some of this stuff. They're already now, but the public can do that. We have we all buy Gap or Levi Strauss jeans. The whole world does. And if you go to the Levi Strauss website, it says, we are very conscious of who we employ to make our clothes. We're not using child labor and all that kind of stuff. The reason they do that is because they were fined so hugely because they were the worst in the world in using child labor. So they have to counter it with a big lie.
Yeah.
Trump himself. So you think, oh, that's what a great company. No way. They're being forced to do that. And so they're making what's it called? Making lemonade out of it. Making lemonade out of a bad situation there.
Interesting.
The Chinese are with the people in the far west. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Uyghurs or something. Yes. They're using child labor and all that, and we know that. But the public knows that. I myself and people I know are looking at the labels on a sweatshirt when you go, made in China, put it down. The market is very good about that. And that's the Jeffersonian side that I like about America. don't underestimate Americans, and don't underestimate maybe anybody. We're all human beings. Human beings are smart and clever. And all you have to be told sometimes, don't buy the Chinese stuff. You don't need a government law. People, nobody wants to buy child labor products. Nobody does.
Yeah, no, that's a very positive note to end this conversation on. And I know, you know, you're a lifelong educator, of course, having taught for 40 plus years and more in the public schools there in San Francisco. And I know you've said you really learned, don't underestimate anybody. People are capable of making a difference. I think that's really great. So thank you. And before we close, I just want to remind everybody to be sure to pick up copies of David's books, Income and Wealth and a San Francisco Conservative. You can do that by visiting his website, davidparkeressays.com, or by going to Amazon. So thanks very much. Catch you again.
That's good. Thank you.